Hear you. Are we starting the session?
Yes, I'm about to start.
Okay. Then you click the start button then when you are ready. Okay. All the best. Well done.
Thank you. Hello, guys. Good evening and welcome to today's edition of 30 Minutes of Product Management. So today I'm taking you through the importance of API management in your role as a product owner or a product manager. So I'll begin. First of all, one will ask that, what is an API? API basically means application programming interface. Application programming interface. Now, someone will ask, what is interface? Interface means that something that allows two different things to interact together. So human beings, for example, are brains, and then we have our neurons and blood vessels and other things like that. But then the brain cannot interact with another brain. So if I am Ni, and then I have a friend who is called Joseph, I wouldn't be able to interact with Joseph if I have only a brain and Joseph also has a brain. So something must come between myself and Joseph through which we can communicate. And that is what the interface is. So when it comes to human beings, the interface is going to be our body. So with my body, I have a mouth, I can be able to talk, and I can be able to make sounds. I can be able to make signs and things like that. That can help me to communicate. That can help me to communicate with the other person. So that is what an interface is. So APIs basically are intermediaries that enable communication between different software applications. And APIs also act as messengers that will translate requests and then response between applications. The example that I gave was between myself and then a friend who is called Joseph. So when Joseph speaks, the API, the interface, which is his body or his mouth, would translate it into a language. And then when he also speaks back to me, the interface, which is his body also, will translate it into a language that we both can understand. So with APIs, there are like set down procedures or rules by which the different applications will be able to understand each other. So that's basically what an API is. Okay. Now, someone will ask me, okay, Lee, if I want to develop a software and I want to use the API method of creating a software, what are the different types that there are? There are the open API types. Those are APIs that are open to the general public. So for example, is let's say Facebook, right? You can hook onto the Facebook API so that anytime that you send a message, like a Facebook message to your Facebook wall, it will show on maybe your application. Maybe you've designed an application, like let's say a mobile application, and then you want any time that you send a message on your Facebook wall, it will also show on that particular application. You can hook onto the Facebook API. So basically, like I explained, API is basically like a middleman that kind of connects the two different applications. So the API, the Facebook API is going to connect your application and then the Facebook application also. So that's what the public API is. We also have partner APIs. So with the partner APIs, those have to do with business interest. So maybe I'm a software development company that provides payment services for other people. And then there's another company that wants to design, let's say, a marketing piece, like an e-commerce site. So we know that with e-commerce sites, for there to be seamless integration, we have to kind of implement some sort of payments so that people wouldn't have to be doing physical cash anymore, but everything is going to be smooth and simple. So in such situations, we can go into a business agreement so that anytime that there's a transaction on that platform, payments can also be done through my API that I provided to that business partner. So you can have like partner APIs. So it means that the API will be accessible only to my partners. We also have internal APIs. So the thing about internal APIs is that those are APIs that can only be accessed by people in like the company, the producing company. So if let's say Lean Icon produces an API and it is only developers in Lean Icon that have access to it, we call it an internal API. We also have composite API. Those are APIs that are combining different APIs to produce, like, let's say a single API. You understand? So like, let's say I've created an API that does payment integration, and then that particular same API also takes Google API. So we know Google gives, we have Google Maps where you can have access to locations and things like that. So maybe I've created an API and my API is also using the services of the Google API, and I'm combining different APIs. That's called a composite API. Okay. Now, the main topic, which is the importance of the APIs in product development. Someone asked me that, what's the use of API to me as a product owner or product manager? What's the use of the API? Now, when I build, and then I build everything as a monolith. A monolith means that we are building in such a way that your front end, your back end, and whatever component of the software that you are building, everything is in one. If you build it in that way, you see that at the end of the day, you are the only one that can be able to use that particular those functionalities. But you can't have other partners hooking onto your app because you built it as a monolith. But then when you build it as APIs, you separate them, you split them, then you can be able to make it accessible to other people. So when you create APIs, it enhances interoperability, which means that there is communication between systems and then platforms. And then there can be integration of third-party services. When you build an API, so when you build an API, let's say when you build your backend services as APIs, it is not only you that can be able to use it, but then it also speeds up your development. So let's say if Lean Icon Technology builds a payments platform, right, for let's say an e-commerce site that we are building, but then we build the payment service as an API. What's going to happen is that when we are building another platform or another software, which is, let's say, a banking app or an insurance app, because we built previously we built the payment service as an API, it means that this new banking app or platform that we are building, we can make use of that API that we built before by following the communication protocols that it requires. So those are some of the use of the API. So it means that you wouldn't have to rebuild another payment service in this new banking platform that you are building. It also improves flexibility. As you can see, once it is something that you can make use of in another project, it means that it is modular. So you can connect it into different applications or platforms where that kind of functionality is needed. Now, with everything, we know that everything has a life cycle. Even human beings, we have a life cycle. So you are born, after you are born, maybe you go to school, you get married, you start having children, you do all of those wonderful things, and then finally you die. So APIs also have life cycles. So the life cycle of an API starts from the planning stage. So in the planning stage, that's when you iron out, okay, what's the purpose of this API that I'm building? So if it's a payment API, then you know that what are the things that I'll need to make sure that a payment goes through. And then you define the purpose for which you are building that API. You also define what your business objectives are. So you are not just building in isolation, but then you are building to achieve some business objectives also. In as much as we are trying to bring improvements in the lives of other people, we are also trying to get some business. We are also trying to get some business done to earn some money. We also iron up your scope. Okay, so what exactly should this API that I'm building, what exactly should it do? Who are my target audience? And then the use cases, the scenarios by which the API that you are building will be required. Okay. And then after you've planned and you've ironed out all of these things, then you go to the designing. You design that, okay, for this particular API that I'm building, there will be this number of endpoints, and every endpoint is going to perform a particular function. You also define what your data models are going to be. So maybe you are going to have some parts that are going to take maybe arrays, some are going to take strings or numbers. The authentication mechanism. So basically what the authentication mechanism does is that if I'm building an API, let's say it's a payment API, and then we are going to have other companies or other applications hook onto that particular API, I need to find a way to make sure that that API that I've built is secured so that no one will be able to hack it. So you need to put authentication mechanisms in that particular API so that it will be robust and secure and safe for other people to use it. And then also when people are using that particular API and then they are having issues, you need to make sure that there's a mechanism in place to handle errors so that when there are errors, their apps will not crash or the whole system will not go down. But then you have to make sure that there's a mechanism to handle those particular API. So after you've planned, you've designed your API, then you go into development of that API. So development basically means you are implementing whatever designs that you agreed that, okay, this is how we are going to go about it. Then you implement it by virtue of the code that you write. Okay. So as you are implementing the APIs, you also have to be testing them because you don't want to finish everything and then you push it out there. When you push it out there and people are using it, then you see that there are bugs and errors in the implementation that you did. But then as and when the development is going on, you are also doing your testing. So you can see that I think the last time there was 30 minutes product management, we had the DevOps in software development. So as and when you are doing the development, we are also testing to make sure that the incremental updates that you are making on that particular API is devoid of bugs because they've been thoroughly, I mean, you can't devoid it of bugs 100%, but then you can at least mitigate the number of bugs or errors that are going to come up as you are building and you are testing at the same time. So after you are done with, like, let's say you develop and then you test, then you deploy. So you develop, test, you deploy, develop, test, you deploy in incremental increases or updates. So when you are deploying to, you make sure that you version them. So when you look at ChatGPT, we have ChatGPT 1, we have GPT 2, GPT 3. So that's the versioning. So you see that the version for ChatGPT 1 is different from ChatGPT 2 in way of the upgrade. So you see that ChatGPT 4 will be better than ChatGPT 3 and vice versa. And vice versa. So if someone has, let's say somebody's application is hooked onto your version 3, you need to find a way that when you upgrade or you update your services, the version 3, the people that were hooked onto version 3, it will not break their app. So you have to take into consideration all of these things. Also, you go to monitoring and maintenance as the last step of building an API. So after you build an API in software development, there's nothing like completely done. So after you are done building the thing, you also have to be doing routine maintenance on it and then monitoring. And then you'll be taking feedback from the users. Okay, maybe there were these particular issues or glitches that came up. So how do we go about solving those particular things? So all of this will be done in the monitoring and maintenance. So basically, the life cycle of an API is not like that of a human being, which ends sometime. But then with the API, when you get to the monitoring and maintenance, it runs over and over like the same. It runs over and over and over because you always have to be making sure that we are monitoring whatever is happening on the API. Okay. Now, what are some of the best practices for managing API? So for a particular API where there are a lot of people that are going to be using, definitely it means that if I'm not there physically, some people might be having issues hooking onto that particular API. So how can I mitigate some of these things? Those are some of the best practices that you have to take into consideration. And one is what? Documentation. Your documentation has to be very comprehensive. It has to be clear. And then you have to also add examples. So let's say for the Google API, if I want to be able to get access to their Maps API or let's say location, the Google will provide me a documentation with an example of someone who has let's say gotten access to that particular API and then used it, and then how the person went about. So just like Google, the Google documentation for their API is very comprehensive, clear, and comes with example. That's the same way when we are building APIs. We also have to make sure that our APIs comes with documentation, which are very clear, which are simple to understand, and it's not complex. Also, when we are building APIs, you have to make sure that they are secured. Before you got here, I mentioned the authentication so that anyone that is using your API, you can be able to know whoever is using it so that people will not be using it for malicious purposes. Versioning. You also have to version your APIs. So you have version 1, version 2, version 3, and also have to make sure that even as you are versioning it, there's compatibility. So that let's use WhatsApp, for example. Let's assume WhatsApp is on version 20 right now. And then there are some people who are using version 17. You have to make sure that even though you've updated your app or your API to version 20, those who are still using version 17 can be able to still use it without any hitches or glitches. And then monitoring and analytics. When you are building an API, you have to make sure that you put in place tools and processes by which you'll be able to monitor and then analyze everything that is going on. So that when there is a lot of traffic on your API, a lot of traffic basically means that when there are a lot of people that are using your API, it means that there's going to be a lot of stress on that particular server. So that when things like that are happening, you know what you have to do. Maybe you have to scale vertically, or you have to scale horizontally, or you have to add more security or any of those things. You have to make sure that you take into consideration all of these things when you are building your APIs as a way of going along with the best practices. And then the last thing is also, the last thing on the best practices is community and support. You have to try and create community of developers and then provide support for people that are having issues with connecting to your API. So if, for example, you have a payment API, definitely you will have companies that will be trying to get access to your API. Example is the e-commerce site that I was talking about. So we have Paystack like this, and then Stripe, which is a payments platform. A lot of developers use their APIs to provide payments platforms on their apps. So with let's say software providers or API providers like Paystack, what they have to do is that they will have to provide a community of developers, which also have let's say internal people from Paystack that will be there to help people who are having issues with their API. Yeah, and then they should provide support for them. So if someone is trying to get access to your API and they are having issues on your website, there should be a available contacts, whether by email or phone, so that they can be able to reach out to you for help. Yes, so I've spoken about a lot of things, but then it's not all of them that you can do yourself. Some of them you need tools to be able to help you to do that. And then some of these tools are APIG for API management platform. So it's a platform that you can use to manage your APIs. So after you build your APIs, which is like in terms of writing code and all of those things, you have to have it on a platform that will help you to be able to monitor, let's say, the traffic and things like that. So you can use the API gateway, the AWS API gateway, sorry. You can use the Azure API management tools also. Like I mentioned, when you are building your API, you have to make sure that you are testing it as part of the best practices. So you can use Postman to test, you can use SOAP UI, you can use JMeter also. Some of the monitoring tools are New Relic, you can use Datadog, you can use Splunk. And then documentation tools, like I mentioned, and you have to have documentations for your API where developers can go through and then know that, okay, so if I want to access this particular functionality on this API that has been created for me, this is how I have to go about it. So some of the tools that can help you to document easily so that developers will find it easy integrating into your API is by using Swagger, Redoc, and then API blueprints. So I've mentioned a lot of API. Now, examples of them are the Twitter API. What it does is that it integrates Twitter functionalities. It helps you to integrate Twitter functionalities. So let's say anytime you make a tweet out there, you want it to appear on your software platform or whatever it is, you would make use of the Twitter API. I think they also have some payment functionalities and things like that of which you can use. And then the Twitter API gives a lot of support. So if you're having issues with that, there are available mediums through which you can get access to contact persons from Twitter to help you out. We also have the Stripe API, which is used for payments processing, and it has very, very easy integration. We also have the Google Maps API. Basically, what it does is that you see that when you go to some websites, you'll be able to see some maps on there. You know, they didn't have to go and then map out that whole area and then do, let's say, UI, UX and stuff like that to be able to show you that map. But then they get access to the Google API, and then they integrate the Google API into their websites. So it's like something that they would have done if they were doing by themselves. It would have taken a longer time. By integrating into the Google Maps API, that whole process has been shortened for them. And then we also have the Nalo API. Nalo is a company in Ghana that provides messaging services. So if you want to send bulk messages and things like that, you can hook into their API. So anytime you want to send messages to your customers using the Nalo API, you can just send bulk messages to other people. Now, with everything that we are trying to build, there will definitely be some challenges and then blockages. So what are some of the challenges that we might face when we are building an API as a product manager? Some of them are scalability. So as and when people are using your API, you see that there will be a lot of traffic on it. The pressures will be high on it. And when things like that start happening, it means that you have to expand your operations. You have to increase the number of, let's say, servers that you have and things like that. So some of those challenges are like the challenge of optimizing the performance, because when it's not only about expanding the number of servers and things like that, but then if, let's say, in January, your traffic is about 2 million people, and then in February, your traffic is about 1 million people, it will mean that if you provide about 1,000 servers for 2 million people, and then now you have only 1 million or 1.5 million people, and you are still using 1,000 servers, so you see that we are misusing some resources. So we would have to be able to put in place ways to mitigate such situations so that you are optimized in way of your performance. So as and when you need to increase the number of servers that you have, you are able to put in place ways to deal with all of these things. Also, security. As and when a lot of people are hooking onto your API, you have to be upgrading your security measures so that there wouldn't be people who are doing nefarious things on your platform and you are not able to track them. No matter how much security you put in place, there are always people who try to outsmart the system. So you also need to have people in your company or internal people who are always trying to find way by which the platform or the API that you built can be breached, so that you can find ways to mitigate all of those issues. And then also the version management that I was talking about. You have to find a way to provide migration guides so that when you migrate from your version, let's say version 5, and you are going to version 6. I think right now iOS is on version 17. So when they are going on version 18, we have to find a way to help people to be able to know how to migrate from their version 17 to version 18. If maybe they are going to lose some data or something like that, we have to let them know. We have to put into place systems to guide them through. In conclusion, what I can say about API is that APIs are very, very crucial for modern product development, because if it wasn't for API, it means that anything that you are building, you have to start from scratch. But then API gives us the ability to build things in modular. So you can build a software platform where you are using Google Maps API, you are using Stripe API for payments, you are using Twitter API for, let's say, messaging and things like that. And then instead of you having to build all of those things yourself, you are able to hook onto APIs that have been created by other people to kind of simplify the process for you and make it fast for you. Okay. And then we can also say effective API management involves planning, designing, developing, testing, deploying, and always doing some maintenance. Always follow the best practices and use the appropriate tools in your API development process. All right. Thank you very much for attending this particular session. Please, if there are any questions, I'm here to. Okay. Someone is saying says that there's a question from Daniel. He says, how do you monetize APIs? Yes, so as a company, you are not only going to build for people to use. So you will find a way to make some money on the APIs. So using the authentication process that I was talking about. So before people can get access to your API, they need to have an account. And you can put, let's say, some payment gateways on those particular accounts so that as and when they subscribe to a particular level of service, you give them access to specific functionalities on that API. So because of the authentication, you can now require people to make payments before they get access to your API, thereby making some amount of money on it. Any other question? Please, you can put your questions in the chat. Okay. Frank asks, as a product owner, how often should I engage my team on APIs to understand it for the product development? Okay, so I think you should, once your team is using a particular API, at least the team members should have a fair overview of how that API works. And then those who are using that API should have in-depth understanding of it, so that as and when your app crashes, you know that the crash is coming from that particular API and then not from, I guess, your software. Okay, UM says, what are the subscription models for APIs? I think the subscription models are they will be dependent on the business requirements for building that particular API. You know, when I was talking about I spoke about the life cycle of APIs. Okay. So over here, when immediately we are planning for the API, we take into consideration the business objectives. So depending on the business objectives, you are going to generate your subscription model. So there are some people who have, let's say, standard version, where the standard version just give you surface level. There are some people who have, let's say, bronze, gold, diamond, and all of those things. So it's dependent. Yeah. Okay. So in the absence of any new questions, okay. All right. Please, are there any new questions? Okay, in the absence of any new questions, I'll just like to speak about some of the programs that we have on Let's Digital Academies. So at the Let's Digital Academy, we give education on product management and product ownership. We also train in the agile method of building, whether it's a software or any kind of project management. We provide consultation, and then we also help in change management. So you can reach out to Lit. We have different models that we offer. We also offer training in software development with the Lit Digital Academy, where you can learn how to build software either as a front-end developer or a back-end developer, or you want to maybe be a QA engineer. A QA engineer is the one that helps with the testing and make sure that whatever that we are building, we are putting in place quality, so that we are not building and then when people use it, it will rather deter them from using the platform. So Lit Digital Academy offers training concerning all of these particular rules. And then those are front-end, back-end, QA, engineer, DevOps. These are very high. There are a lot of companies that are after people that have this kind of skill sets. These skill sets are in high demand. So I would entreat anyone that has questions or want to understand software development or has the interest of joining the software development industry to reach out to the Let's Digital Academy or Lean Icon Technology. You can go to our website. You can get our contacts over there, reach out to us, and then we'll get back to you quickly. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Okay, I think Frank has put the link to the website in the chat. So anyone that wants to, okay, I think someone has lifted their hand. Hello, Rorat. You can speak. So thank you very much for attending the session. And you have access to the Lit Digital Academy, the links to the website in the chat. So you can follow and then you can reach out to us and we'll get back to you. Thank you very much. Bye.